Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Nance. I'm a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and I am coming to you from Los Angeles, California. I'll be chairing today's public live stream event. One moment. This week, the number of coronavirus cases has surpassed 2 million globally, with the United States ranking highest in both the number of fatalities and infections. Additionally, over 22 million people have filed for unemployment in the last 4 weeks alone. At a time when the world economy is in tatters, the United States government is callously threatening immigrant workers' pay, and Texas is attempting to ban abortion services altogether. The government should be paying workers more, not less this time, and should stop threatening the right to abortion. We stand with workers. The PSL has been broadcasting live stream Thursday to provide a regular political analysis on different aspects of the struggle against COVID-19. During this time, so many new people have joined us and many more are thinking about joining us. In light of this, today's live stream focuses on the need for a revolutionary party and the work of the PSL around the country to help everyone become more familiar with our organization. Building a working class socialist party in the United States is the most important thing we can do right now if we want to see an end to the criminal capitalist system. We're going to start off with 3 short videos from some more recent members who will tell us about why they joined the PSL. Then we'll hear members in 2 branches that are engaged in social solidarity work in their cities. Lastly, we'll have 3 speakers from the party's central leadership speak to us about the need for a revolutionary party, particularly at this moment in deep crisis, and then we'll close with a Q&A segment. The PSL is a rapidly growing social party comprised of people just like you. Our members are multinational, multi-generational, belong to different communities, and are united by a revolutionary political program, the need to transform society to meet the needs of the majority. We believe in the right to free universal health care, to a quality job, to a job with a livable wage, to quality housing, and a free education. It is the everyday poor and working people who are the ones who should be bailed out during this crisis, and not Wall Street or the big corporations. We believe that society's many injustices are directly tied to the unjust capitalist system, and that any sustainable solution to these problems should begin with the overthrow of capitalism. If you are interested in learning more about becoming involved or helping build the revolutionary movement for socialism in the United States, we urge you to consider joining the PSL today. You can fill out an application by visiting pslweb.org/join. In response to the current crisis brought on by the global COVID-19 pandemic, our party is demanding free medical treatment for the nationalization of the healthcare industry, mass production of test kits, personal protective equipment, ventilators, and other medical equipment without profiteering, cancel the rents and mortgages, suspend evictions and utility shutoffs, all with no accumulation of debt, the immediate release of prisoners who are most at risk of contracting the virus or who are held on a pretrial basis, and an end to each and every ICE raid and deportation. Lastly, international solidarity and cooperation, an end to the economic sanctions, blockades, or any other hostile imperialist action. The PSL is calling a national day of car protests in cities and towns around the country next Saturday on April 25th. We will demand a national cancellation of all rents, mortgages for homeowners, small landlords, and small businesses for the duration of the entire pandemic. To stay up to date on the work of the PSL, you can follow us on social media at PSL Web and read our daily analysis of the pressing struggles at liberationnews.org. Now we're going to begin our program in just a moment, but before we do, I'd like to ask everyone watching right now to take a moment and share this live stream on your social media pages and help our message reach more people. Thank you. Our program will begin with 2 pre-recorded videos on why these comrades joined. You will hear first from Kay Pritzker. Kay is an organizer with the PSL and a journalist with Breakthrough News.
I joined the PSL because in a world of abundance, there is no reason we need to continue to live with poverty, war, or environmental destruction. I first became politically active in college. I joined a bunch of student organizations to fight these issues, organizations for Palestine, for workers' rights, for fossil fuel divestment. But it never really felt like we were addressing the core of the issue. I never really felt like I understood where these issues stemmed from. It just kind of felt like a bunch of bad things were happening at the same time. It was only until I realized it was a system, the system of capitalism, that was responsible for all of this, that I sought out the PSL. What drew me to the PSL isn't what a lot of people imagine. It definitely wasn't people walking around the office with the Communist Manifesto shoved in their face. It was really the determination and the hard work, but also the patience and humility of the PSL members that I met that really impressed me. A lot of these people took being socialist more seriously than most people take their jobs. And at the same time, I was also so frustrated with this pessimistic attitude that, oh, we'll never radically change society. People don't want socialism. They're not ready for socialism. Because I knew that I was ready for socialism. I knew my friends were ready for socialism. I knew my family was ready for socialism. So I joined the PSL. And 2.5 years later, I can safely say that that was the best decision I've ever made. We've organized for public housing in New York, an embassy in Washington, D.C. We helped organize nationwide protests against Trump's war with Iran. So if you're where I was at and you feel like the two corporate parties and the amount of change that we need, join the PSL. If you think that a system that puts profit over human life will never have our interests at heart, join the PSL. And if you think that healthcare, education, and housing should be unconditional human rights, join the PSL.
Hi, my name is Hadra, and I'm a member of the DC branch of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about why I joined PSL. So I was first introduced to PSL through organizing on campus around the issue of Palestine. I was a member of the Students for Justice in Palestine chapter at my local university, and through SJP, I met a few comrades who were involved in PSL, and I was really attracted to the work that they were doing, from, anti-imperialist agitation to housing justice work that was going on, especially as DC is facing a massive housing crisis. So that was something that instantly attracted me to PSL. And also generally in my political development, I was at the point where I was starting to recognize how every struggle was connected, from Palestine to America to Venezuela and Cuba, and a lot of experiences within my first year at university really laid bare how connected and these issues were, from confronting the homelessness issue to the coup in Venezuela that occurred earlier in the year. But yeah, it was really just laid bare and made super clear to me that, joining a socialist party was the path forward, and fighting for socialism was, the way to go. So I joined PSL, and it has truly been a really fulfilling experience to be a part of a struggle that's, larger than just you and your community. It's global in nature, and it's you're connected to a lot of people, and united in principles of justice and liberation for the oppressed people of the world. So yeah, that's why I joined PSL and why I urge like-minded individuals and friends of mine to join PSL as well. Thank you.
The last video features Courtney Francis. Courtney is an organizer with the PSL who is an electrician in New York City.
Hi, my name is Courtney, and personal experiences with socialism just come about from seeing how working people will work numerous amount of jobs, make very little money, and still end up struggling with their basic expenses. And it's something that I don't think is right, particularly when we know we live in a world with so much wealth. Overall, I think working people, whether you're young, you're old, you're an immigrant, you're a small business owner, have had experiences like this, where we just kind of get the feeling that something's wrong in our economy, something doesn't really work for us. And, we experience this through the fact that we become poor over time. And we also don't have a lot of political power as working people. And I think that's really the point. The point is that, we can't go to our elected officials. We can't go to our, so-called, democratic leaders and, demand the things that we really need. We get very little response every time we've ever done this. Overall, the system of capitalism is really based on finance capital, controlling, vast amounts of wealth around the world and exploiting workers and our labor. And this dynamic can't really bring about a just world. What's really needed right now, I think, is a revolutionary party and revolutionaries in it. Revolutionaries are people who fight for a world that doesn't really exist quite yet, but we use the vision of the world that we want to build in our minds, and we put that into practice, and we put it into action. And we teach others how to do that as well. Overall, I think in the last couple of years, we're seeing the amount of times that capitalism is really squeezing working class people and out of patience. Overall, I think that what's needed now at this point in history is to bring about a socialist world. And I guess the last thing I'll say is a favorite quote of mine, which is that it was made by the woman named Margaret Mead. She's an anthropologist. She said, never underestimate the effort of a small but dedicated group of people to change the world, because it is in fact the only thing that has ever changed the world.
Before we move on to our next segment, I want to ask that everyone watching take a moment right now to share this live stream on your social media if you haven't already, to help us spread our message and reach a larger audience. You can tune in this Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern and 12 noon Pacific for the PSL's live stream in Spanish of Pueblo Responde a la Crisis with Karina Garcia and Frank Lara. Now we will hear from two organizers from branches that are involved in social solidarity work. First, I would like to introduce Kim Barzola. Kim is an organizer with the PSL in Boston, Massachusetts. She is joining us live. Welcome, Kim.
Okay, so thanks everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate it, and it's great to hear from other people. So I wanted to talk a little bit about an initiative, a joint campaign actually that's being done by the Boston branch here of the PSL called PPE for the People. So as many people may know already, PPE stands for personal protective equipment. And right now during the coronavirus pandemic, we know that the official advice now from the CDC is that people, when you're outside in congregate settings, what it may be, you're supposed to be wearing a mask. But at the same time, we're seeing, no companies, corporations that should be producing this equipment, they're not being asked to do it. We're not guaranteed masks. We're not even guaranteed healthcare. And essential workers that are still supposed to, continue on working for the same amount and not receiving any hazard pay aren't even getting some of these basic health necessities that they need right now. So here in Boston, we identified a need in addition to a lot of these essential workers that live in neighborhoods in Boston that have been historically oppressed. We're also seeing levels of COVID infections higher in historically communities of color, such as the South End, Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan. And these, to be clear, it's not that people of color are predisposed to certain diseases, but that we're also, at risk of exposure because of these types of jobs that are available, but also because of inequities like healthcare and in income that don't make it so we're able to have the protections and we're not being valued fairly on the job. So as a result, we partnered with the South End Tech Center, which is a local organization here in the South End, to produce PPE for the people, as the name implies. And we're producing 4 different types of masks right now: N95 masks that pass the fit test that was approved by Mass General Hospital, as well as Olsen masks that are reusable with and without filters, and face shields, which are a different design and all these serve different purposes. But at the end of the day, I think something that we've really wanted to foreground as a part of this initiative to actually meet the needs of people right now is that, there is only so much that we can do, and we need to be demanding more of our government right now, because the very act of us having to participate in this campaign should serve as an indictment, not just of how Boston is handling it, but really capitalism and the failure of the current system we live under, so the ability to actually provide for people. And this is really no light matter, because we know right now that being infected and not being infected is really a matter of life and death. And so it's critically important that we're not just building these relationships right now and doing the work because we do have that volunteer capacity, but also really be raising these political demands that speak directly to what people need right now.
Thank you, Kim. Now, we will hear from our next speaker. I would like to introduce Eric Vargas. Eric is an organizer with the PSL in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He is joining us live. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Good evening and good afternoon, comrades from all across the country. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to speak to you all. So the Unity and Survival Program, or the US program, is one of the Philly branch's responses to the paired coronavirus and economic crises. So basically, the US program has been coordinating delivery services for people who are struggling the most during this era for a wide variety of reasons, right? Party members and volunteers have been going out to buy essential foods and supplies. We've also been receiving donations and bulk buying privileges from external organizations and stores. We have formalized best practices in order to best minimize the chance of spread in the case that someone were to become sick. And we have partnered with neighborhood mass organizations in a couple working class hubs in Philly, ones which we have previously linked with. And so this program has the added benefit of strengthening those connections and hence our connections to the masses of people. The material conditions unfolding during this crisis leave us with no doubt that this is an effective tactic. However, it must be said that a key distinguishing feature between the US program and other mutual aid efforts is that the US program is explicitly embedded in liberatory politics through a couple of methods. If we were to extinguish its political content, then it would start to resemble mostly charity work. But charity work doesn't bring about socialist revolutions. What does bring about socialist revolutions are coherent, class-conscious people's movements. And we don't have the time, nor is it practical to wait for this to foment. The party has the explicit function of educating, organizing, and mobilizing millions upon millions of people if we ever expect to rid ourselves of this parasitic state of affairs. In that crucial hour, when the masses of people are the most energetic and the ruling class is at the end of its rope, who is going to be able to politically appeal to millions of people to action. Of course, it's going to be the party that actually attained attained vanguard status through years of devotion to the cause. Practice has proven that our tactic is effective. The people who we're serving feel confident that the party has their backs. They ask us about other things, not just pertaining to the program, but also health, education, and more. Through this work, we are establishing legitimacy as a force that can actually bring change. Community leaders and volunteers for the program have been enthusiastic and crucial parts of it, and this has the added benefit of building the party. This is just one way that the party is serving the people, strengthening the grassroots, and building a true force capable of rupturing this system and creating a new one that actually puts people first. And with that, thank you for listening, stay safe, and look out for one another, and all power to the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. For the last portion of today's program, we're going to hear from 3 central leaders of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. First, I would like to introduce Gloria LaRiva. Gloria is a member of the PSL Central Committee, and she is our 2020 presidential candidate. The PSL's vice presidential candidate is renowned political prisoner Leonard Peltier. Gloria is joining us live from San Francisco, California. Welcome, Gloria.
Can you release my video? Hello? Hello, can you release my video? Hi, can you release my video? Hello? Okay, thank you. Sisters and brothers, it's good to speak to you tonight. Good afternoon. In the last weeks, there has been a huge increase in people who want to learn about socialism and join the PSL. Do you remember 15 months ago when Trump gave his State of the Union address and warned there will never be socialism in the United States? Remember? Why was he so insistent that socialism will never exist here? It's because he and his fellow capitalists are quite aware of the dissatisfaction in the population. It's palpable and growing. Socialism is in fact more popular than ever. Now, Bernie Sanders certainly contributed to the growing support for socialism, but it was more than his campaigns, as dynamic as they were. It's capitalism itself that is responsible for people's interest in socialism. Even before the pandemic, people, by their own experiences, were seeing more and more that capitalism isn't working for them. And for 10 years, this growing inequality has accelerated since the last recession, creating a sea change in consciousness of the people. If a Federal Reserve study pointed out 2 years ago that 40% of the people in the United States don't even have $400 in the bank for an emergency, what has this crisis done to them and millions more? Jobs have disappeared. Wages are being slashed for all workers in every industry. And if anything, the failure of the government to order the mass production of tests, PPE, the pittance of a rescue check, makes it even clearer to people that the system doesn't work for any of us. As of last Friday, 22 million people have applied anew for unemployment claims, actually for tomorrow. And many organizations have formed in recent years, progressive groups that are involved in many social causes, and we work with many of them in a united way. But the Party for Socialism and Liberation is distinct. We're a socialist party, which is fighting for a society where there are no homeless, where everyone has housing and a job or an income if they can't work, where all discrimination is ended. And we believe in the actuality of revolution. Not only do we see its necessity, we see that it's possible here in the United States, led by the working class in all its breadth and depth. 16 years ago, in 2004, we were just a handful of people who decided that the time was right. Despite the endless wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the time was right to build a new socialist party in the US. What do we mean by actuality of revolution? Revolution and socialism may seem impossible in the US, in the most repressive and powerful capitalist state. But actually, we see the US as perfectly suited for socialism, and the US working class that will carry out that revolution. Actuality. Why? All the productive capacity and resources make it more than possible to organize a new system and a humane society that meets people's needs in every way. The PSL has produced one of our favorite posters. We say workers make the world run, workers should run the world. I want you to look at everything you have in your home, sisters and brothers. Your clothes, your food, everything. The transport that you take, bicycle, car, public transportation, everything in this modern era in the world is created by the organized and collective social production of the workers. Everything. My shirt says made in Vietnam, but the cotton was produced here in the United States, probably sewn in Vietnam, but shipped across the Pacific and back, transported by rail, driven by truck to stores, stocked and sold by store workers. A car, the steel, glass, rubber, plastic, electronics, it must be made by hundreds of thousands of workers in social production and across the borders. Literally thousands of hands produce the day-to-day things that we use. All the workers, again, in social production. The problem is virtually everything that produces those goods and services, what we call the means of production, are privately owned. Social production, but private ownership. And this contradiction of capitalism, for example, means that when General Motors decided it would stop marketing its economic model, the Cruise in Lordstown, Ohio, the largest factory in the world, and replace it with SUVs and luxury cars to maximize its profits, it shut down this plant and left thousands of workers without a job. The workers had no say, and the only thing that mitigated their situation was the union. But under capitalism, even with the union, the owners have the right to do whatever they want with that factory. The executives and major shareholders, the tiny handful of owners, are the real dictatorship. It's a capitalist dictatorship. Jeff Bezos owns Whole Foods. Think of how many millions of workers produce all those products, but he owns Whole Foods. Now, if Bezos and his executives didn't show up for work, nothing would happen. But if the workers don't show up, everything stops. If one product in a car is not produced, nothing moves at all down the line. So what is the solution to the crisis of capitalism? Revolution. Get rid of the capitalists as the owning class. Take everything they've stolen away from us, and we would run the economy in a sustainable way with common ownership of all the means of production. To run society sustainably. We've been fed every day, sisters and brothers in the media, that our heroes have to be the millionaires and billionaires, and that we must be grateful for the philanthropy of a few million. Some computers to kids, or throw a few $1,000,000 for a stadium to be renamed, or a hospital so they can blaze their name on it, like Zuckerberg General Hospital in San Francisco. Now, philanthropy has its price, and we're paying for it. Our own history, the history of the dispossessed, the working class. Our history is proof that all social progress came from struggle. Where did May Day, that great international workers' holiday, start but in Chicago? The fight of the enslaved African people in constant rebellion and resistance while building the wealth of the capitalists. Native people who fought time again against the greatest odds, but the resistance continues. Sometimes it seems like things will never change. Injustice has been growing. People become disillusioned, and we struggle for reforms only to see them wiped out. The US ruling class has perpetuated the myth that the United States is the greatest country, the perfect democracy where freedom reigns. Suddenly now, that myth is being wiped out in the blink of an eye, and all the bloody crimes of capitalism exposed for what they are. We have the highest number now of COVID deaths, 32,000 today, caused by the government's criminal neglect. Workers in the most essential of jobs, from medical to farm workers to food processing, grocery store, and delivery, left completely on their own with no PPE, exposed needlessly and dying because of it. Think of the families and the survivors who are affected. In South Dakota, where there were very, very few cases until recently, the Smithfield pork plant, an international conglomerate with tens of thousands of workers, and in South Dakota, in the eastern part of the country, where the governor still refuses to order an emergency state. At that one plant, more than 600 workers now, and 150 of the family members are positive with the virus. That's more than 2/3 of all the state's cases, making it the #1 hotspot in the country today. Prisoners are dying in jails, seniors dying from a virus that has swept through the homes like a wildfire, and Black people dying in record numbers. Wall Street, the banks, the war manufacturers, the real estate giants, they're getting trillions in this rescue while people have nothing to live on. And now there's a crisis of housing and the risk that millions could face eviction after this crisis is over. Well, we say this: if not one renter paid their rent or homeowner paid their mortgage, every building would be standing. The only thing that would collapse would be the real estate industry. Now, would that be so bad? Because everybody would stay housed. And of the 17 million empty homes, new homes that are vacant, everybody who's homeless or in overcrowded conditions or poor housing could have a home for free without having to pay a penny to the banks or real estate giants. That's socialism. After all, who built all those homes? The workers. Who provides health care? The insurance companies or the doctors and nurses? Well, it's obvious. And who puts food on our tables? Monsanto and ADM? Or the farm workers, food processors, and grocery workers? Every adult in the US could receive and should receive $3,000 a month to survive the crisis, citizen or non-citizen. We demand massive testing and not a penny more for the banks and war manufacturers. This is all possible today, sisters and brothers, because the resources are there. Trump and his cohorts say socialism will never happen in the United States, but we believe this is where it will happen. After the fall of apartheid, a South African said, "Revolution seems impossible until it happens, and then it seems inevitable." There's one thing that's essential to the victory of revolution, and that is a revolutionary party. And we invite you, sisters and brothers, to join us in becoming part of that party and fighting on. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria, for that presentation. You can follow the presidential campaign on Twitter at Lariva Peltier. You can also sign up for campaign updates and learn about the life of our presidential candidate, Lariva Peltier, by visiting larivapeltier2020.org. Next, I would like to introduce Eugene Puryear. Eugene is a member of the PSL Central Committee, author of the book Shackled and Chained, Mass Incarceration in Capitalist America, as well as co-anchor of Breakthrough News. He's joining us live. Welcome, Eugene.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that. Good evening, good afternoon to everyone who's joining. And, I'm very happy to be here with everybody. And, thank you to everyone who's already presented, very enlightening in many different ways. And I think that, I want to talk briefly with you, comrades, tonight about, not why the issue of a revolutionary party is really an issue of necessity, not just an issue of predilection or just an issue of what you would want to do. And I think, what Gloria was mentioning about Jeff Bezos owning Whole Foods and the issue and so much of what's being exposed about who really runs things and what shuts down depending on who goes to work, that the power relations in our society are completely and totally upside down. I mean, power to paraphrase something that was once said by Marx, is, not really, or that, capital is not really money, it's power. The ability to determine and to shape the destiny and the lives of other people. And we're seeing that now with certainly the Jeff Bezoses of the world and all these other business owners putting people out there without PPE, their ability that they have, to really determine who lives and who dies, the debacle around the production of medical supplies and everything happening there. I mean, I think we're seeing more and more that, really the handful of people have not just a handful of money, the handful of wealth. We hear all the statistics of, 5 people own as much as 85% of the majority of humanity, whatever those statistics may be, but that it's not really just about the money and the ownership. It's about what that means, and it means the control over people's lives. So the struggle that we are in is really a struggle for power. That is a struggle to define and determine the destiny for working class and oppressed people in a collective way where we can all live, people before profit. And I think that when you think about how that sort of plays itself out, then I think you realize that off the top right there, that this sort of struggle is not one that can just be carried out in a siloed way. It's not one that's just an issue of, protesting. It's an issue of a major transformative change in what goes on. I mean, a situation where, what does it mean to be able to shape your own destiny in the context of coronavirus? I mean, the very fact that we were talking and we've delineated so far on this call so many critical needs that could be met that aren't being met, despite the fact that the vast majority of people want them to be met. That's the lack of power. And to have that kind of control over how society responds to the major crises and fluctuations and circumstances of living that affect us, that this struggle is really about. And the idea of us in the PSL, the idea of a socialist party, the idea of being revolutionaries is to speak to the how do you get from point A to point in such a deep way, the power relations that I think we see playing out so negatively and that we're pushing back against. And I think that's what's powerful about the type of party that we are and the concept of party that we bring to the table, which is that in order to confront this centralized, massive power structure that obviously has all the money, all the resources, all of the repressive apparatus, we have to be able to build a counterforce of the organized people from all sections of the working class and exploited peoples of the United States to bring in the talents, the experiences, the relationships, the differences, whatever it may be, to create in conversation with one another the type of organization that can, debate and determine and then actually do things on the basis of a all-sided analysis of capitalism from the perspective of its victims, and certainly with the consideration to the strategies of those who are running things, but to really be able to plot a course on how to change things on the basis of what people really want democratically and how they want to see a system of people before profit, and how we can really get there by understanding the system, the cracks within it, how to exploit that, which can only happen by collectivizing the knowledge, press leaders as we possibly can to be able to build that kind of fighting force to take on the sort of powerful forces we know the elite, the ruling class country to be. And that is the type of party that the PSL is building. That's the type of party we want to continue to build. And all of us, in our view, or many of us, I'd say anyone who's watching this live stream is a leader. We often don't think of ourselves like that. We're told not to be like that, not to consider ourselves that, not to believe in ourselves or to feel that we can be empowered and engaged. And I think that that's something that we're also trying to imbue people with, that you can change the world and we can bring people together. And so that's really, why I'm so happy to be here speaking to you, many people especially who are thinking about joining the PSL and saying, what makes this different than other types of organizations? Well, we're not just defensive, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, but just in the sense of fighting to stop the worst excesses of capitalism, or to try to do whatever we can to alleviate any amount of pain we also participate in, but to start to put together the pieces of all those different struggles and all the struggles that need to happen that aren't happening, to plot a course to really go into the offensive and to transform things, to change the context in which struggles are taking place, by stressing the true root nature of political consciousness to really be able to move things forward. forward. So, we call on you really to join us. I mean, we need people to come together. It's not just about us here talking to you. It's not just about us having the way, but really being able to collectivize this knowledge and being able to collectivize these experiences and build the type of powerful force that can truly contend for power, that can look at those that continue to shape the destiny of all the rest of us and propose another destiny that's determined amongst us that we can move to. So I'll just stop the rest of the conversation.
Thank you, Eugene, for that presentation. You can hear more from Eugene by watching Breakthrough News on YouTube. You can also follow the show on Twitter at BT Newsroom. Now I would like to introduce our final speaker for this, Brian Becker. Brian is a member of the PSL Central Committee. He is joining us live from Washington, D.C. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you to the other comrades who participated in this event tonight. We're doing these on Thursdays. As Andrew mentioned, we are a party of action. We, as Marxists, understand Marxism and Marxist theory not to be a dogma. Marxist theory is the generalized experience of the working class, the decades and centuries of working class struggle to try to generalize what we've learned, how to win, what's happened when we lose. And Marxism is above all else. And this is what Marx or Lenin or all those who have prescribed or subscribed to the ideas of Marx have noted that Marxism is above all else a guide to action. And we urge everyone to join with us a week from Saturday, that's Saturday, April 25th, to organize car caravan protests all around this country to demand that the government cancel the rents. Not a moratorium on rents, because after 2 or 3 months, when the moratorium lifts, working class people who are unemployed in the millions will not be able to pay their rent. They will be facing eviction in July or August. The working class did not create this crisis. This is not even fundamentally a coronavirus crisis. The 22 million people that Gloria mentioned who filed for unemployment insurance in the last 4 weeks. And by the way, that number is not the total number of the jobless. There's another 10 to 15 million workers who are unemployed, who have lost their jobs, but who are not eligible to file for unemployment insurance. They are workers who are working in the gig economy. They are immigrant workers who perhaps don't have legal papers. They are still part of the working class, the essential class in society. But because of their status, they're not able to apply for unemployment insurance. The real number who have been made jobless in the last 4 weeks is not 22 million, but probably closer to 35 to 40 million people. These people will not be able to pay rent. If they have a home, they will not be able to pay their mortgage. The reason they were laid off was not because of the coronavirus. Anybody. Employers fired workers. The government ordered employers and businesses to shut down, and workers lost their jobs. The reason the government, the capitalist government, the Trump administration, but it's not just Trump, it's the Democrats too, the reason they had to take these draconian measures is they spent January and February and the early part of March bashing China, demonizing China, ridiculing China, blaming China, calling it the terrorists, instead of doing that which was necessary to prepare the population for what was obviously going to be a virus that would spread to the shores of the United States. It was because of the capitalist government's negligence and malfeasance, its criminal conduct, that we are where we are today. And every worker who has been laid off today has been laid off because of the malfeasance and negligence of the capitalist government. Then that government turns around and says, look, we have to save the economy, which means offering a $6 trillion package. And it's not just the $2 trillion from the federal government. It's the $4 trillion lending facility backstop created by the Federal Reserve. And of that $6 trillion, $5 trillion goes to the banks and the hedge funds and the corporations. And the working class is being told, look, we're going to give you $1,200, which Mnuchin, the Secretary of the Treasury, said should last you 10 weeks. That's $120 per week for 10 weeks. While they bail out the banks and the hedge funds and the capitalist corporations, workers are laid off. It did not have to be this way. This was a decision by the capitalist state. And this is a consequence of the capitalist state's orientation. Workers in Denmark and France and Russia and other capitalist countries have not lost their jobs. They have not been compelled to go onto unemployment lines and wait for days and days or weeks to get some unemployment insurance. They know that their job will be guaranteed. They're not fired. The capitalist governments in those countries, because they fear the working class, bailed out sections of the working class. Here, the United States government, by its own criminal actions, created a crisis and then said to the 30 million workers or 40 million workers who are laid off, sorry, that's your problem. And what we're saying is, as a socialist party, is that this is not the way it has to be. This is not the way it should be. And if we act together, we can change the situation. If millions and tens of millions of workers say no to the capitalist government, you created this crisis, you bailed out the banks and corporations, we're not going to pay rent, we shouldn't be compelled to pay rent, we won't pay rent, this country can turn around. If the government fears the workers, all kinds of reforms can come. But if we fear the government, if we're in a state of backing up or bowing down to the powers that be, the capitalists run roughshod over the workers. We're building a socialist party. There's a lot of heritage to this in the United States. There were massive socialist parties and a mass communist party in the 1930s when that depression started. And that depression, by the way, is going to be considered smaller than what we're experiencing right now. We are already beyond the Great Depression in terms of unemployment numbers, and that will exponentially increase in the coming weeks. The Communist Party's slogan in the early 1930s was to demand unemployment insurance. That didn't exist in the United States. The slogan of the Communist Party was fight, don't starve, because 5,000 people literally were starving to death every year in the United States. Older people had no Social Security. Workers did not have the right to unionize. As we mentioned earlier last week, the workers under the leadership of socialist and communist parties and communist and socialist organizers began to move. They began to mobilize. They became radical, which meant that they, as Eugene said it, demanded the power. General strikes took place in San Francisco and Toledo and Minneapolis in 1934. Thousands of factories were seized in sit-down strikes, not just at Flint, but all over the country. And in the face of the rising tide of the socialist and communist movement and the working class generally in the United States, the ruling class, the capitalists who said, no, we can never give you unemployment insurance, we can never give you Social Security, we'll never legalize the right to form unions, suddenly all of those demands that seemed impossible in 1932 became realizable in 1935 or 36, because the workers were moving, because the working class was fighting, because the socialist and left movement was growing. I mean, a lot of us have paid attention to or been part of the Bernie Sanders movement in 2016 or 2020. We know many of you who are applying for membership in the PSL now were very hardworking volunteers for the Sanders movement. You, like we, like millions of other people, especially millions of young people, tens of millions, wanted what Bernie Sanders was demanding, a political revolution, an end of staggering student debt, affordable housing, free healthcare, or affordable healthcare. This calls for a political revolution. But when the Democratic Party establishment and its media arms tried to destroy Sanders and then did destroy the Sanders campaign, Bernie left. He dropped out and decided to support Joe Biden. You cannot support Joe Biden and at the same time be for political revolution. Joe Biden is the antithesis. I don't need to document all of his conduct, but he's pro-war. He's a racist. He's pro-capitalist. He's an imperialist. He is not the political revolution. And we can't have socialist movements premised on supporting this or that politician, because this or that politician can step back and say, I surrender, I cry uncle, we have to do something other than a political revolution. Let's settle for something less. Let's settle for the lesser evil. Let's get Joe Biden instead of Donald Trump. Not the political revolution. To build a real socialist movement, it can't be based on the personality of a politician, no matter how sincere or earnest they are. In order to build a socialist movement, the working class needs its own party, and a party that's developed based on experience, based on collectivity, based on the theory of Marxism, which takes, again, the generalized experience of past working class struggles and forges it together to fight, to do combat with the capitalists, to mobilize the people, to make the people understand that we, the working class, produce everything, and that if we don't work, everything stops, and that we are the indispensable and essential class. But what we don't have, as Eugene put it, is we don't have the power. In order to get the power, we have to have a party. That doesn't mean we don't have united fronts. We have many, but we need a working class party that can lead the movement, that's based on a solid revolutionary program. No single individual can say, sorry, this movement's over. That can never happen with a real, genuine socialist party. We invite all of you to join our party, to look into it, to find out where we are, what we stand for, and for everyone to join us in the streets, in these car caravans on Saturday, April 25th. We'll have more announcements coming about how you can register your protest in your city. If we unite the working class and those who are renters but can't pay the rent, if we bring the millions together, and they can be brought together, we can win this battle. We can cancel the rents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian, for that presentation. Now we're going to move to the Q&A segment where we have a few questions for our presenters. The first question is, what would be a socialist government's response to a crisis like the one brought on by the coronavirus?
I don't know if Eugene or Gloria would like to go first.
Yeah, I could say something. Well, we've spoken about what so many scientists, doctors, and those on the front line have demanded, and which is very true. They know more than anyone what's needed. But I think that it's good to point two examples, three actually, maybe more, of what has already been taking place in other countries, with two of them with far, far limited resources, actually blockaded by the United States. And that is Cuba and Venezuela, which have very low incidence of the positive people, and also people who have died, even despite having a lack of the ability to buy the items from abroad because of blockade. And the other thing is, under socialism, the people, unlike here, who have to worry about their housing, about healthcare, in a socialist country, healthcare is free for everybody, and that's not a problem at all. The other is housing. In Cuba, almost everybody is a homeowner, and anybody who rents, it's only 10% of one person's income. And if you never paid rent, even if you refuse, you'll never get evicted. So I think those are huge differences and advantages. But in addition, for us in a socialist country, all the resources would be shared among doctors, scientists, in that any medical gain would be for the benefit of all without the motive of profit and ownership by a handful of people. Instead, we know what it's like right now, that whenever there's a life-saving medicine, the first thing you hear in the report of the news is the stock market and how much value it's going to bring. And the rarer the disease and the more difficult the disease, the higher the price of the medicine. So that's what we would have, I think that the virus appeared in China, and it was a national plan, a coordinated plan to lock down Wuhan, to lock down so that it wouldn't affect the rest of the country. Now, I want to just say that Trump was bragging the other day about how he took the first action in banning travel from China. You know, that wasn't the answer. The answer was to deal with it inside the United States immediately. And before any case, they could have taken measures. And the first thing that's needed now before anything starts kicking back up in the economy is testing. And they're refusing to do this. But I'll just end there with that point.
Thank you, Gloria. Next, we'll go to Eugene. Again, the question is, what would be a socialist government's response to a crisis like the one?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I kind of want to flip the question. I mean, I think, part of the concept of a socialist society and government is that we wouldn't be responding to a crisis like this because we would be trying to have the mitigation in place that there wouldn't be a crisis like this. I mean, you think about New York City, where I am now, New York State, the so-called epicenter, in 20 years, 20,000 hospital beds lost, hundreds of millions of dollars cut from Medicaid payments, taking the hardest shots at the frontline medical care facilities that are having to serve from some of the hardest hit communities. Our EMTs, criminally underfunded, underpaid, overworked. I mean, consistently over time, I think we're seeing the ugly side of this lack of preparedness. I don't even want to say lack of preparedness, because people have known about pandemics for a long time. The fact that they're willing to gamble with people's lives and say, well, let's just cut a bunch of hospital beds. Maybe something bad will happen. Hopefully it won't. But this is our ideology of not spending on public health. And the whole concept, I think, behind socialism and putting people's needs before private profit is the type of resiliency that you would need to have in a public health system to really aggressively address these things when they come up, would be the type of thing that outside of the crisis that we would be prioritizing and pushing forward, rather than pushing forward profit making and all these other different pieces. I mean, you have some issues with hospitals not wanting to buy ventilators because they don't know what's going to happen to them after the crisis because it won't be profitable. I mean, you look at those kind of, just devil's bargain kind of things that are going on a regular basis. I think it's easy to see. So, I think it's very good to talk about what we would do and how we can respond and how things could be different right now. I think it's also important to recognize that when we're talking about transforming the system, we have to recognize that the depth of this crisis is not just because coronavirus is so bad, but because capitalism is so bad. It's not just coronavirus. I mean, it might be coronavirus induced, but it's not coronavirus caused. The worst elements of this, economic, social, public health wise, are because we weren't prepared. And that was because everything is oriented towards profit in this country, and quite frankly, most all over the world. And that's what has to change. And that's, I think, what's going to put us in a position to really talk about how we deal with pandemics in a long-term perspective, as well as climate change, poverty, and so many other massive challenges.
Thank you, Eugene. Brian?
Well, Andrew, I see that we're at the 7 p.m. East Coast time. So even though we had promised people we would keep the live stream to about an hour, so I think we could. And if people, if you, Andrew, in our concluding part, tell people again if they want to find out a little bit more about PSL and how to pursue interacting with us, you can do that. I also want to just say, as we wrap up, that again, Saturday, April 25th, we want activists, we want PSL branches and chapters and people all over the country to be organizing their own car protests with the demand, cancel the rents. I would suggest that when people are trying to map out where you go on your caravan, be sure at least to go to the city jail or a prison near you and demand that those prisoners be released that while we're fighting to cancel the rents for those workers who are not imprisoned, we can't forget about our sisters and brothers who are in jail. 2.3 million Americans, or 2.3 million people in America, are in jails or prisons. The U.S. has 1 out of every 4 prisoners in the world. 5% of the world's population is in the United States, but 25% of the prisoners in the world are right here. They're working class folks. They're incarcerated. They can't physically and socially distance. According to the 13th Amendment, they are able to be treated like slaves. We have cases where prisoners are making face masks now in prison, but only the guards are going to be able to wear them. We have to show solidarity with this section of the working class, the incarcerated section of the working class. So again, Saturday, April 25th, let's get out there, let's mobilize, cancel the rents, and let's find other creative, innovative ways to show that the struggle to stop evictions, the struggle for employment, the struggle for affordable health care, the struggle is also about support for those who are incarcerated. And also, we as a socialist party so when we say that we want social justice, it's not just for the working class and the oppressed in the United States, but when we think of the people in Venezuela or Cuba or Iran or North Korea or China or Russia, all the countries that the United States is targeting, when we see the people of those countries, we don't see our adversaries, our enemies, we see our sisters and brothers. And as we go out and organize for social justice at home, we want to do it in an internationalist, anti-imperialist spirit, showing the people of the world that we together have a common foe. We shouldn't be shooting each other. We shouldn't be occupying other countries. We shouldn't be droning other countries. Our problem, our enemy, is not in Tehran. It's not in Pyongyang. It's on Wall Street, and it's in the hall rooms of the military industrial complex and the boardrooms. We have to have that kind of a socialist party as we continue to organize again during this pandemic, during this depression. Let's go into the streets. Saturday, April 25th. It's a car protest, but it can be very highly creative, and we can do it all around the country, sending the signal that the working class fight back has started.
With that, we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much, Brian. And I'd also like to take a moment to thank all of the presenters again today for joining our program and sharing with our viewers. Before we end the live stream event, I want to remind you all to tune in this Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific for the PSL's live stream in Spanish, El Pueblo Responde a la Crisis with Karina Garcia and Frank Lara. You can follow PSL on social media at PSL Web, on Twitter and Instagram. You can read our analysis on liberationnews.org, support our presidential campaign at larivapeltier2020.org. And once again, on Saturday, April 25th, you can come out and demand a national cancellation of all rents, mortgages for homeowners, small landlords, and small businesses. We want to encourage everyone to find out what's going on. Thank you for joining us. We're going to continue to do these live streams just like this one every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern and 3 p.m. Pacific. So be sure to tune in next week on April 23rd. Remember that thinking about socialism is good. Thinking and talking about